Let's take an early look at the T-6 Midair at the Reno air races. This was especially tragic because this was the last day that air races were going to be held at Reno. The organizers were forced to move the races to a different location. And so this midair happened on the last day in one of the last races to ever be held at Reno. It happened in the T6 class and in the gold category. You have to earn your way into that gold category by speed, so it was the fastest of the T6 racers. And the two pilots involved in the midair were both experienced racers. They had raced multiple times before, and both were previous champions. The race is organized for this race. The active runway was runway 8, and the race course, the home stretch comes along runway 8, parallel to runway 8, and then a left-hand turn out around the pylons and back. And the home pylon, or the finishing pylon, is right in front of the crowd that run in with the race running parallel to runway 8, right about the middle. So the racers took off, they entered the race, they flew about 6 to 8 laps. It wasn't really a close race between first and second. The lead racer won the race by some 5 seconds or so. And then once he finished, there came by other racers that were in a little bit closer proximity to one another. Now, the way the racers work is once they finish in that home pylon, they pass it, and the race is called the checkered lap. Then they pull up into what's called a cooldown pattern. That cooldown pattern is about 1,000 to 2,000 feet AGL above the race pattern. And it's designed so that once the racers come by, they pop up into that pattern to dissipate their airspeed and to cool off their airplanes and to cool themselves down mentally. If you think about it, they've been flying at 50 feet AGL at high speeds within a few feet of each other. And so once they finish, this cool down area is designed to give them some time to let that adrenaline release and get back into sort of normal VFR flying operations. It's a chance for them to just compose themselves and now get ready to come back in for a more typical aviation landing. In that cool down pattern, they're allowed to stay in that pattern as long as they'd like to. And that's by design. The organizers want it that way. They don't want the pilots to feel rushed. They want them to take their time to get the airplane ready, to get themselves ready, get their speed under control, and then drop out of the cool down area. And the way that they do that in the T6 when they're landing runway 8 is they'll fly that cool down pattern, and then they'll come down and report an initial for runway 8 and fly basically a standard overhead pattern, like a military overhead pattern, which means they'll fly up the runway, go into a left brake. Once they're abeam the touchdown point, commonly called the perch, they'll call downwind abeam, and then their next call is base gear down. Then they come in for a landing. It's kind of a constant left-hand turn. It appears that it was somewhere along that base leg to final kind of area, and the accident happened outside of pylon 4 and 5, so that tends to track as to where the accident happened and the phase of flight that it happened. So we'll look for the NTSB to try to sort it out, but it seems like the accident happened somewhere between the transition between the cool down area and then the overhead pattern into the landing, somewhere in that area. So what can we learn from this for the rest of us GA pilots and for other event organizers? First, we all know this, we've heard it many times, but the flight's not over until the aircraft is shut down. Now, for most of us, that means, making sure that it's not just over with an approach or with a VFR pattern or a few touch and goes. For these racers, it's a little bit different because their adrenaline has been running at pretty high levels. And so for them, they need to release some of that adrenaline and come down, but not entirely. They've got to keep the vigilance up and make sure they bring it all the way into landing fully aware. Now, the Pylon Racing School reinforces that. All of the racers have to go through this Pylon Racing School to race at Reno. And the racers I talked to, many of them have gone through the Pylon Racing School multiple times. In fact, some of them like to go through it every year that they race just to up their proficiency. And in that racing school, it's reinforced to them the vigilance that the flight is not over until you're shut down in the chocks. Somewhere this flight broke down. The second thing we can learn, especially as event organizers, is anytime we're funneling airplanes into the same location, whether it's a VFR reporting point, an IFR fix, whether it's a runway to come into land or taxiing into a throat in an area, that's always a potential conflict. And we have to think through thoroughly a deconfliction plan and contingencies. Now, Reno Air Race Committee has done this extensively. If you read through their procedures, they're extensive, they're long, the pilots have to be tested on it. They know these procedures very well, and these two pilots would have known them extremely well. So the challenge for Reno is going to be to figure out through all of those procedures and all the lessons that they had, how did a gap occur to where they could have this kind of conflict and it not go recognized. And then finally, we've mentioned this before, but those belly checks, anytime you're in any kind of extended turn, a mental clock, you need a mental clock running in your head that makes that a little uneasy, to where you roll out and just check your belly or the place that you're about to go belly up to, expecting there to be traffic there and looking for it. Any kind of long extended turn where we stay in the same bank for more than 90 degrees is a cause for alarm and something that we should try to avoid, roll out when we can, and clear the flight path in front of us. Now, T6s, the visibility inside of T6 is very good above the wing line, but in a turn, especially in a descending turn, obviously a low wing airplane, the visibility is bad below the airplane and below the belly of the airplane. And so whoever the high pilot was, if they were in that kind of turn, they would have been blind to the aircraft underneath them. It's a tragedy, such a shame that it happened on the very last day that there are going to be races in Reno. Our hearts are with the Reno Air Racing family, and our prayers are with the families of the pilots who were lost in the accident yesterday. Thanks for watching.